Finding the right person can be so much easier if we just stop playing all these games. We carry our personal insecurities, beliefs, and mindsets about love and what it should look or not look like into our relationships. I strongly believe that if someone wants to be with you, they will make it clear and try to make it work. Hey, hello, welcome or welcome back, and today's video is going to be a chit-chatty type video about relationships, because relationships are the foundation of a happy and fulfilling life, and yet in school we're taught how to study better and get better grades, but not taught how to build and maintain healthy and strong relationships. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Grab a snack, grab a drink, and let's get right to it. Before we begin, let me just say that today's video is going to be mostly tips and lessons that I've learned on approaching relationships in relation to dating and other people. But it's very important to remember that a lot of the times our relationships and how we show up in them is oftentimes a reflection of who we are. We carry our personal insecurities, beliefs, and mindsets about love and what it should look or not look like into our relationships. So it's very important to be very self-aware and introspective in recognizing those patterns within yourself. And oftentimes that would mean having to work on yourself before you can get into a happy and fulfilling relationship. So for example, someone who has a fear of abandonment from their childhood because their parents didn't give them a lot of appreciation and love might be more susceptible to trying to people please in a relationship and staying in a relationship with someone who is not as good for them because they're afraid of being alone. That's one example of how our personal traumas and histories can really complicate the way that we approach relationships. So just be aware of this, and you can also check out another video that I did on how to be alone that I'll link up here to help condition yourself to be more ready for a future relationship. Now that's covered, let's jump into the rest of today's video. Let's start with crushes and dating, because I think when you're younger, this is how you first start getting into love and relationships. A little bit of background on me to contextualize some of the lessons that I'm going to share. I went to a girls' school for, I would say, 16 years of my life, and so I had no crushes. But when I did start to have crushes when I was in my late teens, so 18 and up, I noticed that I had a very specific type, and that was guys who were very outdoorsy, who were very athletic, and I think that really appealed to me because I'm someone who also likes nature and likes to keep fit. But I think that the first lesson I learned regarding love and relationships is that oftentimes your type is not always what is best for you, and you can very easily fall in love with someone who isn't your type on first glance. In fact, the people that I eventually got into relationships with did not fit that type. I realized that actually having a type is not always a good thing, because when you have a type, that means you are very drawn to them physically. When you have a really intense crush on someone, you tend not to act like your authentic self. In fact, I heard somewhere how attracted you are to a person is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most attracted to them, you should try to date someone who is like 7 or 8, because if not, you could be potentially blinded by your attraction to them. And in a healthy relationship, you can't just be attracted to them. You can't just have chemistry, because in a strong relationship, you need 3 things. You need commitment, you need chemistry, and you need compatibility. And if you are intensely attracted to people and you have a very strong chemistry with them, you might neglect the other 2 C's, which are also really important. So you may be intensely attracted to this guy who's your type, but he might not want to be with you, so there's no commitment, and also he might not align with you, right? His values, his lifestyle, the things that he's looking for in a relationship, i.e. compatibility, might not be aligned with yours. So I think fundamentally, be very cautious about your type. Physical attraction is something that can grow over time, as long as you are emotionally attached to someone, and that's, I'm speaking from personal experience. So yeah, I think be open to dating many people, even if you're not attracted to them on first glance. On a very similar note, my second lesson that I learned both in my relationships and through my crushes is to fall in love with the person and not the potential. I think when we first start going out with someone, honeymoon period kicks in and we tend to put people on a pedestal. But if you have an idealized image of who someone is in your head, it's very easy to ignore the reality of who they are. It's easy to ignore all the red flags, excuse all the bad behaviors, assume that you can change them, or assume that they will want to change because of you. But I think going into a relationship, you shouldn't ever expect the other person to change. If they do want to change, that's up to them. But you have to accept that they might honestly just stay who they are right now forever. And you have to be okay with that. So I think it's so important to remember to fall in love with the person right in front of you and not the potential of who they can become. Sometimes it's hard to know like who someone is until the honeymoon period, starts fading away and they start to reveal more of their true selves to you. So I think it's very important to give time to any relationship before rushing into more serious commitments like moving in together or marriage. And based on my experience, this usually pans out one of two ways. Firstly, your initial instincts will right about the person and the relationship just gets better and better. You learn more about each other and fall more in love. Or two, you figure out over time that there are fundamental incompatibilities. The person isn't really who you thought they were, or there are some things that you overlooked at the beginning that you realize now you don't want in a relationship. And at that point, I think it's very important to weigh like what is more important to you, all the positives of being with this person or all the negatives of being with this person, and then make your decision about whether you want to stay or not. The third lesson that I've learned in this realm of like courtship and dating is to not be afraid to show your interest or your lack of it. I've heard so many people complaining about getting mixed signals, about not knowing whether to make the first move or not, about playing hard to get. And honestly, hearing all these things really frustrates me because dating can be so much easier. Finding the right person can be so much easier if we just stop playing all these games and just were more honest about what we're looking for and our interests, etc., etc. I'm really a firm believer that if you're interested in someone or you're not interested in them, just make it clear to them. Just communicate your feelings and intentions clearly. That way, you guys can either explore the possibilities of something more with each other or, move on to other people, right? It doesn't need to be so confusing. And I think sometimes the reason why it's so confusing is because people don't have clarity over their own emotions, in which case I think it is very difficult. That's a whole different issue altogether. Being self-aware, actually understanding whether you want to be with this person just because you want to be in a relationship or because of who they are fundamentally as people. These are different lessons and reflections that someone who is confused needs to make on their own. That's a separate conversation. But for those people who do know, right, their feelings but are afraid to communicate them, I think it's fundamentally because people are so afraid to be vulnerable. But I think vulnerability and honesty is so important in the formation of a healthy and stable relationship, both at the start of when the relationship is forming, meaning that there's no game playing, there's no confusion, and also throughout the relationship. And that's why I think so many people have such bad experiences online dating. It's because ghosting is a real problem. People just disappear if they're not interested anymore, instead of just politely telling the other party so that everyone can move on. Anyway, after a couple of confusing situations myself in my past, I just decided that I'm going to be with people who are very clearly interested in me and aren't afraid to communicate their interest. I really do feel like that's the mark of a very emotionally mature partner. And I strongly believe that if someone wants to be with you, they will make it clear and try to make it work. This was exactly how it was with my current partner. So no game playing, it was very clear that we were both interested. And it was very interesting because we met online, which is a whole different ball game. He was, I think, one of the people who most clearly demonstrated his interest because he would really respond to my messages with like long paragraphs. I know some people don't like that, but I genuinely like that because I do that too. And of course, I also tried my best to show that, you know, I was trying to move things along. So for example, I told him really early on, like maybe after the first day, I said something along the lines of, is this something that is better to talk about in person? And then he said, yeah, probably. And I said, FYI, this is your cue to ask me out. So I was very clear to him that I wanted to meet up quickly, which made it easier for him. I'm not saying that everyone who's online dating should meet up with a stranger within the first week of starting to talk to them, but that was within my comfort level. And I knew that, so I wasn't afraid to put myself out there. And I think that's my point, right? Like within the limits of what you're comfortable with, don't be afraid to indicate your interest. So now I'm moving into relationship territory, what I've learned from being in and leaving relationships. Earlier I mentioned having 3 C's for a stable and healthy relationship: commitment, chemistry, and compatibility. But I think the reality is that incompatibility and your deal breakers are sometimes very difficult to define. Most of us have a very vague idea of the ideal qualities that we want in a partner, but from my experience, a lot of the times it just comes down to trial and error, which is why I really advocate for online dating or even just, you know, having multiple relationships, because that really helps you figure out your must and must not haves. So for example, when I was online dating, I knew that, okay, these were roughly the traits that were important to me, right? I wanted to have someone who I could have intelligent conversations with, who could engage me intellectually, and I could learn from. Secondly, I wanted someone who didn't mind that I was vegan, who was healthy to a large extent. And thirdly, I also wanted someone who had all the important qualities that a partner should have, right? Like commitment, someone who's very generous with his time and money, someone that makes you really feel very protected, loved, etc., etc. And I thought when I first started out online dating that they were all equally important. But when I went out with multiple people, some people had more of one thing than others. So for example, I went out with this guy who was super healthy, right? He did yoga, actually he taught yoga, he was vegetarian, he was ambitious at work, but I never really felt like I could go deeper with him, you know? So I saw him for like maybe like 5 dates, collectively over a month and a half. But I never felt like we could talk about like deeper issues, like what he envisions for his future, his biggest dreams. We couldn't have very in-depth conversations about, you know, social, political, environmental issues. And overall, I just couldn't see a future with him, right? Even though on paper, he seemed like he had all the important qualities that I wanted. So at the same time, I was dating someone who was also very intellectually engaging and also was vegetarian, but he was extremely intellectual to the point where I couldn't keep up. And then I met my current partner, who, even though was not vegan or vegetarian at that time, and we seemed to have very different lifestyles, was someone I could actually envision a future with. He's also super intelligent and we have great conversations. I learned so much from him. So I think what I'm saying is that I realized over the course of dating all these people that, you know, there were some traits that were more important to me than others. For example, it's not so important for my lifestyle, like how I eat, you know, type of exercise that I do, etc., to align completely with my partner's. It's so much more important for me to feel safe, secure in our relationship, to feel loved, right? All those things are more important to me, and those are the things that my current partner gives to me. And I don't think I would have gotten these insights if I didn't try out online dating, and if I didn't have this trial and error process of, you know, dating people who were similar but different, and realizing that some relationships worked but others didn't because of XYZ. Okay, and this leads me on to my final takeaway from my relationships. I mean, I have others, but this video is getting really long, so I'm just going to leave it at this one, which is, with the right person, things will feel easy and natural, but that doesn't mean that there aren't conflicts. Even with the most compatible couple, disagreements and incompatibilities are bound to happen, and that's completely normal. I think the trick is just learning how to work through it together. I really learned this the hard way because in my first relationship, I always didn't want to bring up problems and issues because I was so afraid to create tension between us. But obviously that's not a good solution, because what happens is that all the issues that you have just snowball and resentment grows. Also, when I did communicate my concerns, I don't think we dealt with it very effectively. So moving into my current relationship, we established some ground rules for conflict, dealing with conflict, and I'm gonna share them with you guys today because it's helped us so much in dealing with all of, the disagreements that we have. So ground rule number one for resolving conflict is to never be afraid of communicating your worries and your issues. In fact, I would say someone who wants to be with you and an emotionally mature partner will want to work through with you because they will want to stay with you. So please communicate your displeasures earlier rather than later. If not, they will snowball. Secondly, if I want to bring up any issues, I will always start a conversation by saying, please remember that it's you and me versus the problem and not you versus me. And I think this is a very important grounding statement to remind your partner why you are discussing it. It's not to attack them, but just to tell them that there are aspects of your relationship in which you aren't satisfied, and in order to have a stronger relationship together, you need to work through it. So it's important to set this foundation so that you guys are on the same page, trying to work together to solve it versus fighting each other. Thirdly, I think it's really important to understand how your partner responds to conflict. Sometimes, differences in dealing with conflict can lead to tensions and emotions running really high. For example, if you're in a relationship with someone who wants to have time to think about it and to process everything that you said, and you're someone who likes to talk it out on the spot, and if not, you feel very uneasy and unsettled, that's yet another potentially conflict-inducing situation, right? Because you don't deal with conflict in the same way. So I think it's very important to kind of understand each other, try and empathize with your partner's way of dealing with conflict. Honestly, I think differences in dealing with conflicts can also be a potential issue. But I think as long as, you both are on the same page and you communicate early on before the conflict even happens, then you both can have an understanding of each other and work through any disagreements more smoothly. So the fourth thing is to don't assume. Don't assume that they know what you're thinking. Don't assume that you understand their intentions. I think sometimes misunderstanding is the root of a lot of fights. And this is especially the case now in the age of digital communication. Intention and emotion is not very easily communicated over text as well. That's why clear communication is so important. And if both of you are so heated and angry that you can't talk calmly to each other, it's important to cool down first before having the conversation. Okay, number 5 is to fight fair. Don't bring up the past. Do not nitpick on your partner's insecurities and weaknesses that they've shared with you in the past, because that is a surefire way to erode their trust. Don't accuse someone of always being like this or never doing this, I think these superlative statements are not helpful. They just rile the other person up. Remember that there's a difference between being honest and being mean. Being mean is operating from your ego, always wanting to get the last word in, wanting to prove the other person wrong, not being willing to admit your own mistakes. That's being mean. And being mean hurts the other person. It erodes faith and trust in your relationship. So don't be mean. One technique that I've used and I've heard many people recommending is to make I feel statements. So instead of saying, you always never take out the trash, or you always leave dishes in the sink, you can say, I feel really overwhelmed when I have to come home to a sink full of dishes. Or I feel disappointed that yesterday we spoke about you taking out the trash every Monday, but today is Monday and you didn't take out the trash, and I feel like you did not take what I said yesterday night seriously. Using I feel statements are therefore so much more effective in communicating how you feel and helping the other person see your point of view instead of insulting the other person. So on a similar note, I think it's very important to also practice active listening. Try to actually understand your partner's point of view and not just get defensive. I read this quote the other day which really helps to sum up this point. You're going to hear your partner tell a very different version of the situation. This is because you are two different people trying to have the same unique perspective. You don't have to argue with how they're feeling because, number one, when somebody has told you that you hurt them, you don't get to decide that you didn't. And number two, feelings are not facts. They're somebody's reality. My next conflict resolution tip is to not invalidate their needs. Everyone is different. Everyone has different perspectives and things that annoy them or make them tick. Being a good partner means understanding that there are some things that your partner might need you to do that you don't understand, but you will do it anyway because you love them and you care for them. So for example, in the first 6 months of my current relationship, my partner told me that he doesn't like it when I say "or" on text. As you can see, even though using the word "or" is very normal for me, it was not difficult for me to take it out of my vocabulary when I was talking to him. And because of that, I was willing to do it because I wanted him to know that I cared about how he felt. Okay, so final resolution conflict tip I have for you guys is that only one of you should get heated at a time. Where one of you gets really angry and heated, the other person should try their best to remain calm and really try and listen to understand the other person's point of view. I know the natural response is to get heated and defensive as well, but doing so will just blow up the situation even more. So instead, when your partner starts getting a little bit crazy, try and recognize that, do your best to keep a cool head and ask yourself, what is your partner asking from you? Why are they reacting in this way? And usually, a lot of the times, what they're looking for is love in some form or another. You're much more likely to arrive at a productive conclusion and even diffuse the situation if you apply this tactic. And obviously, it should be two-way. Try and make sure that when you are upset, your partner does their best to stay calm as well. I know conflict is a word that conjures up a lot of worry and fear, but I can assure you that if you're in the right relationship, if your partner is on your team, conflict can be resolved very effectively. In my current relationship, conflict is solved very quickly, and in fact, every single time we resolve a tiny disagreement, our relationship gets stronger. Over time, I really do believe that your relationship should grow to become something better and not worse. If you've watched till here, thank you so much for sitting through this really long video. Please feel free to leave your own comments and advice down in the description below. Tell me what resonated with you, and also remember that I'm only 23. I definitely have a very long life more to continue learning more about relationships. So don't take everything I say as gospel, and I'm very happy to hear other perspectives as well. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm very excited to see you guys in my next video coming real soon. Bye.